Hi friends, it's Jason, and today I wanted to talk to you about a series I just finished. It's a 9-book series, 10 if you include book 8.5, but we'll get to that in a minute. What I'm talking about is Zodiac Academy, and this series is not for everybody. It is technically a YA fantasy series, and I'm going to start this off with a few caveats because if you don't like romance in your fantasy series, this isn't for you. If you don't like spice in your fantasy series, this is not for you. If you do not like queer relationships or interactions in your fantasy, this is not for you. There are some trigger things in this series like torture, abuse, bullying, etc., especially early on in this series, and if that's something that triggers you, this is definitely not for you. That aside, what I'm going to tell you is it's an interesting series. I did enjoy it. There are it's a unique series. It takes place at a school. It is kind of a chosen one type, found family, enemies to lovers. It's all in there. So basically the premise of this series is these two teenage girls, they're twin sisters. They were hidden in the human world, not the Fae world, by their parents to protect them from enemies of their parents, and everyone thought that they died. And when they are pulled back into the Fae world, the series starts from there, and they go on from there, and book after book after book is their progression throughout the series, and what happens to them and the surroundings and their friends, their enemies, etc. Now, if you haven't read this series, normally I am not one to read novellas or 0.5 books in between the main books. But when I was reading the final book, Restless Stars, another reader advised me that I should read 8.5. Otherwise, I would not get some of the nuance and jokes, etc., storylines that would happen in book 9, the final book. I'm glad I went back and actually read 8.5, so keep that in mind if you haven't yet read book 9 or the series as a whole, and do give that book a chance if you're going to read this series. It's definitely helpful when you read the final book. The writing in this series, sometimes it was hit or miss for me. There are parts of this series that are absolutely gut-wrenching, like the end of book 4. Prepare yourself if you read this series. It's heart-wrenching. It's very tender and emotional, and like I said, gut-wrenching. There are other moments in this series that kind of felt like sometimes the authors were mailing it in a little bit. Like it didn't feel as well written in bits and pieces, but there's other parts that are absolutely fantastic. The storyline is really good, and the writing is strong. So it was a bit of a dichotomy for me in that regard, but overall I enjoyed this series. Again, like I said, there are a multitude of different relationships throughout this book. There are regular heterosexual relationships. There are queer relationships. There is a fair amount of spice in this series. So if that's not something that you enjoy, I will preface there is some of that throughout the entire book. So just book series, keep that in mind. Now, I'm trying to do this without saying any spoilers about especially the final book. So I'm going to try and do that, and then near the end of this, I'm going to talk a little bit about my spoilery thoughts of the last book. So I'll let you know when that's going to happen. But the two sisters go through this series in this whole new world of coming from the human world. They were foster kids. They were out on their own now. They were teenagers. They were living on their own, and they were a bit of a couple of troublemakers, and just to survive. When they are pulled back into the world of the Fae, and they go to a place called the Zodiac Academy, which is a school for young Fae. And now there are vampires, there are werewolves, there are unicorn shifters, there are mer people, there's all kinds of things in this series, all kinds of different species, and you'll get to interact with them all. So it's a unique take when it comes to that. At first they don't know how they fit into this world, just that they originally came from this world, and it's a journey of discovery for them pretty much through the entire series in stages. And there's a lot of heartbreak and trouble and fights and battles and bullying and all kinds of things. You'd expect that in a school of paranormal magical species, and it's interesting. Now, if that sounds like something that might be of interest to you, I definitely say give it a try. Again, like I said at the beginning, all of those caveats that I said, just keep that in mind. And I'm just going to go into a little bit of spoilers here for the final book, but if that's something that might be interesting, do check out Zodiac Academy, the 9/10 books, and it might be something that you're interested in. Now, speaking of the last book, if you've read it, and there are some spoilers here, I honestly think that book 9 could have been 2 books. On Kindle, it's over 1,000 pages. So for some people, that is a bit daunting. For me, I'm used to reading epic fantasy, and long books don't bother me at all. But just the storyline in this made me think that this could have been 2 books. One, for those that have read it, the Clydenius story just seemed to stop. It was resolved too quickly, and it was in the middle of the main battle, which I think could have been pushed to another book. I think I get the feeling that this series, the authors just wanted to end it, and I'll tell you why. For example, the Clydenius story at the end, it just stopped. It was resolved, it was done, and they were back to the main battle. It was too easy. It wasn't fleshed out enough. I thought there would be more. I thought that the Clydenius story ending could have been the culmination or climax of the 9th book, and then moved into the 10th book with the final battle and the Lionel thing. And speaking of Lionel, I found that after all the buildup of this 9-10 book series, that his ultimate end was kind of anticlimactic. It was just, there was one breath of fire and he was done, and he had to run through some tunnels, and it didn't seem like there were enough consequences when it came to Lionel's end. And I thought that there would be more damage done to him by all of the people that he had hurt throughout this series, but in the end it was just kind of quick and that was it. So that kind of bothered me a little bit in the end, and I really think that if they pushed this into 2 books, they could have fleshed that out a bit more, and I think that's part of the reason why I think that the authors just wanted to end this. Another thing that made me think that they just wanted to end this were the 4 or 5 time jumps in the epilogue, and I'm not really a big fan of time jumps, so those were sometimes I find those a bit lazy, because you're not really writing out the story and completing it. It's just you're jumping. So those were a few things that bother me. Overall, the series, I enjoyed it. I would recommend it to people to read that don't have any issues with all the things that I mentioned earlier, but I do think that the last book could have been 2 books and a couple of the stories could have been fleshed out a bit more. The Shadow Woman, or I can never remember her name, that was fine how they concluded that. I think that was done well, but overall, give Zodiac Academy a chance. If you think that it might be something you're interested in, check it out, and I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you next time.